Hello, vinyl community. Mike from My Guitar Player 07 here, coming at you live with another vinyl record video. And today, I am here collabing with Mr. Swellhead's Network himself, Logan.
What's up, Mike, America, other places of the world?
Rocking and rolling. We're all rocking and rolling. As Neil Young would put it, rocking in the free world.
That's true.
So, as you can tell from the title of this video, we are talking about three of, in our opinion, the top three most influential bands, American bands, that are out there. Because we all hear about the influential UK bands. We all hear about Queen. We all hear about the Rolling Stones. We all hear about the Beatles, the Kinks. The list goes on and on and on. How many people talk about the American acts? And that's where I would venture a guess that about 70 to 80% of all music out there that is mainstream comes from America. Maybe a little lower than that, maybe 60 to 80. But
just keep dropping it down. It's okay.
but you know, you get the point. A lot of music comes from America, and there's stuff that comes intermittently from other places. Predominantly, the UK is the second place, and I'd say Australia is probably the third, and then a bunch of other places. But anyway, I'm rambling now. So
you think there's more important Australian bands than Canadian bands? Like, I love Australian music. That's not a dig. I'm just genuinely curious.
You know, there are probably more influential Canadian groups, but the very few that come from Australia are quite big in there, though.
That's true.
So. But anyway, Logan, you are the guest, so I'll let you choose your first pick first. I'm curious if either of us have even the same people.
Sure. I want to preface this by saying the inspiration for this topic came from the fact that no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, I think we could all pretty much agree that America isn't experiencing its finest hour at the moment. So I kind of wanted to take a step back and not be so cynical and kind of celebrate the phenomenal musical exports that we have put out into the world for decades and decades and decades. I also capped this at 3 instead of 5 because the other 2 that would be in my top 5, I actually don't own any records from, and I have a feeling you'll show at least one of them. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Okay.
So my first pick from a little state called New York. I think this band kind of was able to run with what some of the British underground was doing and employed in their music in such a way that, to my knowledge, was extremely fresh at the time. So my number 3 pick for most influential American act is the Talking Heads. This particular debut album, and Talking Heads has this just storied career of having multiple breakthrough influential albums. Experimenting with loops on Remain in Light and Speaking in Tongues, and then Stop Making Sense being a huge live record. They've always pushed the limits of new wave, or whatever you want to call it, from the top. What's even crazier to think about is that a lot of these songs were written in like 75. So, and to my knowledge, pretty unparalleled songwriting for the mid 70s. Just the opener, Love Comes to Town, is like, if I was alive and into music back then, I probably would have freaked the fuck out like when that song comes on. And of course you have Psycho Killer in the book I read, and Don't Worry About the Government, and New Feeling, and all these killer tunes. But just this like propulsive, very revolutionary rock act, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm personally a Little Creatures guy myself. That's probably my favorite. But
you know what? Me too. I have a very sentimental attachment to Little Creatures because when I was a kid, my father always used to make me stay up late and it was like, that's the song's about you because you never go to bed and blah blah blah, like sort of in a joking way. But yeah, that's probably my favorite LP as well, even above the sort of groundbreaking stuff from the 70s.
Yeah, that and Stop Making Sense are my go-tos for them. So, all right.
You know what's interesting? I've never watched Stop Making Sense front to back. I used to own the vinyl, so I've heard it a million times, but I've never actually sat down and watched the entire thing.
I've never seen it. I've only had the CD and vinyl record myself, so I'm with you.
Excellent.
All right. So my first pick would be the Beach Boys.
Oh, sure.
So the Beach Boys, I would go as far to say to be the only comparable act that America brought to the forefront that would be anywhere near anything that the British invasion was doing at this time, such as the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and I would even go as far as to say the Kinks as well. And, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Kinks, the whole British invasion movement was inspired by rock and roll music from America, such as Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, Little Richard. Well, these guys were influenced by that rock and roll stuff too. Chuck Berry's youth culture, lyrics, and the upbeat movement of the Beats were the inspiration for the Beach Boys in their early days, and pretty much had the same vibe as Chuck Berry to an extent, except they added surf, West Coast vibes, and, well, amazing harmonies that we know the Beach Boys to be. And what makes the Beach Boys so influential would be Brian Wilson, of course, which is pretty much the equivalent of the Phil Spector at the time, except Phil Spector was just a producer. Brian Wilson was a producer, band leader, regulation of the band, recording the backing tracks and all that stuff. Phil Spector did a bunch of that stuff too, but Brian Wilson was a little bit more hands-on. Not to say Phil Spector wasn't, but I think being a member of the actual band kind of does a little bit more than the producer side. And the Beach Boys also used ideas behind the Wall of Sound, which Phil Spector created. And for those who don't know what the Wall of Sound is, it's pretty much Phil Spector wanted to create a fuller sound with the artistic pieces that he was creating. So don't get me wrong, things like Elvis Presley and all that stuff sounded very well-rounded. But they were a little bit on the more treblier side overall, just because of how recording techniques were and all that. And it wasn't until the mid to later 60s that the bass really started becoming more predominant in music. And even with that, it still kind of had a tinny trebly sound until later on. So the Wall of Sound pretty much gave it fuller and more excessive instrumentation. It would be one of the earliest examples, not necessarily with the Beach Boys works themselves, but with Phil Spector records with I believe the Ronettes and all them. I believe that was one of the groups that he worked with. I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but multiple guitars, tons of vocal layers, various drum kits, and various things like that. And Phil Spector and Brian Wilson were also always called for the musical geniuses. And, it's interesting because everybody knows the hits behind the Beach Boys and this album, Pet Sounds. That's all people know by the Beach Boys. Now, we all know I recently put out an unpopular opinion video on the tube here, and I didn't put anything in regards to this album on there. But, this is one of those albums that it deserves all the hype and credit it gets, but it's overrated only due to the fact that the Beach Boys were so much more than just Pet Sounds, because they had a great early career with the surf rock. This kind of brought in the elements of surf rock and the more intricate works that Brian Wilson was doing, because this is really where the Wall of Sound in regards to Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys really started paving the way. It was in there intricately more hidden, but it's right dab smack in your face. And even though the surf rock isn't as predominant, the hints are in there with Sloop John B and Wouldn't It Be Nice. Some of those early vibes are there. Wouldn't It Be Nice is comparable to the surf rock tune that they did, Help Me Rhonda and all that. But really, no one pays attention to, for example, Wild Honey. It's one of their best works, in my opinion. One of the least acclaimed one. Pet Sounds, it deserves the love it gets, but I think it gets, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think by the time I got to Pet Sounds, it had come with so much critical weight that when I, really sat down and went for it, I was very underwhelmed
Sure.
because I had years of people telling me it was the best record of all time, and I think I've talked about it in a handful of videos that I'm not a huge Beach Boys fan. I will say I have not listened to Wild Honey. I've listened to, I know, the hits, Pet Sounds, a little bit of Smile and Surf's Up, and something else. But yeah, it's funny how, like, I completely agree that they are an important band, just on the fact that so many newer bands that I like, you can clearly hear their Beach Boys influence.
Oh, yeah.
But I wouldn't even thought to consider them for this list because I don't actively listen to them.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because I had the same exact disappointment the first time I heard Pet Sounds. It took about 3 or 4 listens before I was like, okay, I could get behind that. Don't get me wrong, I never didn't enjoy it, but compared to the hype, I was just like, that's what I'm getting.
Yeah.
Like, and I heard Wild Honey before I heard Pet Sounds, so I kind of knew the vibe that was going out there. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, it's not surf music, but like, it's very interesting how I had the same vibe. And it's interesting because after Pet Sounds, as I said, Wild Honey doesn't get much attention, and then everybody was like, whatever, to the Beach Boys. They kind of became unappreciated, and the Beach Boys actually worked their way into this supergroup kind of feel in the 70s, like late 60s, early 70s, because even though they weren't a supergroup because they were a family band, they kind of had that vibe of a supergroup, kind of working on things that would be of the early 70s, some of the stuff that was coming out of the rock music of the late 60s. And you have that supergroup vibe that, quite frankly, I think was some of the inspirations behind groups like Bad Company and The Firm, I would go as far to say.
Yeah.
Might be a slight stretch for some, but it kind of is. And, many people did not love the 70s stuff that they did, especially within the baby boomers age group. But this album rejuvenated their career in the 70s. And, this made them become more of a popular thing again and probably helped further their career in the 70s, and they didn't just plateau out
Sure.
like they ended up doing in the 80s with albums like Caribou, which I kind of think blows chunks. But this release also inspired them to start playing more of their older surf tunes again in concerts in the 70s. And yeah, that's my little shtick about the Beach Boys.
Now, are you going? Did you rank these like I did? So as Beach Boys, you're 1, you're 3. Like, where do you place them in your pantheon?
Beach Boys would be
Here.
3, and I'm going 2, and then I'm going 1.
Okay, perfect. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, my number 2 is a band that also has an incredible knack for harmonies and dual layered vocals, and I think it's actually probably one of the least acclaimed things about this band. There are 2 really key elements to this band's staying power and influential sound. Those vocals being one of them that I actually feel like doesn't get talked about enough in regards to the importance of this group. And I think people that know me and my channel are going to say this might be a little biased, but I want to make the objective case for the second best American band being REM.
Oh, there we go.
If you think about every alternative music act in the 1980s, particularly from America, it all stems from this. People don't realize that this is their debut, Murmur, of course, from 83, Chronic Town being 82. People don't realize that they had a couple years on the Smiths, and Johnny Marr's guitar playing is eerily similar to Peter Buck's, no matter whether he'll admit it or not.
Yep.
There's just so much propulsivity, and they take kind of the driving post-punk sounds that bands like Talking Heads had and sort of repurposed them in like mixing it with stuff from the Byrds and other sort of great legendary acts. And it's the vocal play between Michael Stipe and Mike Mills on the earliest albums, this, Reckoning, and Fables, half the time Mike Mills is singing a completely different lyric than Michael Stipe is, and it sounds perfect. It sounds like a perfect vocal harmony. That combined with the fact that Peter Buck is playing mostly arpeggios the entire time, and it is actually one of like the hardest guitar riffs to learn is a lot of his stuff on these early REM records, because he's playing so fast and playing so many notes that you would almost mistake them for being chords, but he's really just breaking it down to brass tacks on these early records. I think this came out the same year as Violent Femme's debut. I think that is also a huge influential American record as well. But you think about, all the jangle stuff that came out after REM, all of like some of the power pop and just like driving what they would call guitar pop at some point in the later 1980s, early 1990s. Huge deal band. So not just the fact that they are my favorite band, but I do genuinely believe that they are absolutely number 2 in this list for me.
Yeah, not a lot of people talk about REM really in general in the VC, and they are one of those bands that I have a handful of their albums, don't have nearly enough, especially on vinyl record. I have none of their works on vinyl. I only have CDs and cassettes. But yeah, REM was one of the pioneers of jangle pop.
Yeah, I mean, it basically goes from like, the Byrds to REM to everybody else, like more or less.
I totally see that, without a doubt. I never thought of it that way, but you're completely right. All right. My next pick would be Van Halen.
Oh, okay. Left field.
Yeah, compared to the Beach Boys. So, this album made many guitar players, young and experienced, turn their heads. They were intrigued as to how Eddie Van Halen made these sounds with his guitar. And that was the first time it happened in nearly a decade, because it hadn't happened since Jimi Hendrix came on the scene. More specifically with the tapping of the guitar when it comes to the tapping style that Eddie Van Halen does. Now, I must note that Bill over the Vinyl Verse stated to me in one of my videos where I mentioned about this, or he might have texted me, and I'm not sure which, but either way, he told me that I should check out, I forget the name of the song and album at this moment, but there was a Genesis tune that he showed me that Steve Hackett did, that Steve Hackett was actually doing similar tapping styles that Eddie Van Halen was doing. So I have no proof that Eddie Van Halen was not slightly inspired by that. I do not know Eddie Van Halen's inspirations. However, even with Steve Hackett doing that to begin with, Eddie Van Halen made it mainstream. And, Van Halen just as a whole just redefined rock music, and kind of crazy is that they were kind of a joke band in a way, not in a way that like you look at Steel Panther, but they never took themselves seriously. Led Zeppelin was the brick and mortar of like what a rock band looks like until you get to Van Halen. Van Halen didn't take themselves seriously, and then you get things like Ice Cream Man. And they kind of, going back to the guitar with Eddie Van Halen for a moment, Eddie Van Halen kind of inspired more experimentation with guitar sounds as a whole within the rock music industry as a whole, on top of, their own music themselves. And also with the actual placement of like pickups on the guitar. Like, you look at guitars, many people don't know, especially on electric guitars, or they don't know much about them, what those little long oval-looking things are underneath the guitar strings, right where the guitarist is picking. Those are called pickups. They're metal coils pretty much in there that are picking up the signal of the guitar strings and amplifying it, similar to the way an amplifier amplifies the sound from our stylus of a record, like the grooves, in a similar sense. And depending on how those pickups are placed and which pickup you have on, whether it be the rhythm pickup or the treble pickup, or a combination of them all, you have various sounds. And Eddie Van Halen was kind of one of the first to really, really experiment with that. So they were a joke. And Eddie Van Halen always had the mentality that if the sound sounds good, it is good. You'd expect to hear something like that from a prog guy, but really, Eddie Van Halen is the one who said that. And he was always willing to experiment with various instruments, as one could tell with the sound. He didn't care what people had to say. If he wanted to experiment with a synthesizer, he would. He did not restrict himself to the guitar. On stage, he mainly played the guitar. But in the studio, if he wanted to screw around with a synthesizer, he was going to screw around with a synthesizer and not care what people say. Now, with that said, Warner Brothers, the label that they were on top of the producers, were not too thrilled about that and always thought he was lollygagging in the studio at times or just getting off track. But then with albums like Woman and Children Come First, the second track on this, the biggest hit off the album, In the Cradle Will Rock, features Eddie Van Halen, or someone else in the band, I'm not sure, but I believe it's Eddie Van Halen, playing the Wurlitzer electric piano, running through his guitar amps, which I believe were Marshalls at the time, which kind of says something. You wouldn't be able to, like, if you didn't know that, you probably wouldn't have been able to tell that. And it's kind of interesting. And Van Halen, along with not taking themselves too seriously, I just hit my CDs there. They always embrace their mistakes, which there's nothing wrong with that. If you fuck up, you fuck up. But Eddie Van Halen said that a good guitar solo is like falling down the stairs and landing on your feet, which is kind of interesting. Again, he had a very prog rock type mindset for a rock band. And going on the same mentality of embracing mistakes, he liked playing the keys more, whether it be a synth, a keyboard, whatever, because he made more mistakes on it, which is kind of interesting. Everybody usually are discouraged when you have that kind of thing, but not Eddie Van Halen. And David Lee Roth, I don't know if this ever happened with Sammy Hagar when Hagar was in the band, and we don't really talk about Van Halen 3, but David Lee Roth era Van Halen, he would notoriously forget the lyrics and just say in the middle of a song, "Oh shit, I forgot the fucking words," which there's multiple live recordings of him saying that. So them not taking themselves seriously, which is kind of a completely different look of a rock band, on top of the rock guitar changes that really didn't happen too much since the time of Jimi Hendrix, is kind of what makes them so influential. And some people claim, I'm not sure how much I believe or disbelieve this, but many claim that Van Halen saved the world from disco. I don't know about that. But it was a funny theory that I read about a couple weeks ago, and I thought that was definitely an interesting thing to hear about Van Halen.
It could be true. I'm not familiar enough with their earliest timeline and the disco high timeline to say either way. Do you know who helped Van Halen get their record deal?
I do not.
Gene Simmons shopped that shit around for a long time, and nobody wanted anything to do with Van Halen until Gene Simmons gave them his stamp of approval.
Wow. That's a great way to do it, because Gene
going to show that Kiss is always better than Van Halen, baby.
And Gene doesn't like a lot of people, so that's
no, he doesn't. Although I will say, I saw the Kiss tour that just got postponed. David Lee Roth was opening, so I actually saw David Lee Roth open for Kiss, which was like a really weird kind of like historical trip in a way.
Yeah.
And I was just talking to you about this, how I am a way bigger Sammy Hagar fan, but I mean, he can still sing well, and he's an undeniable showman.
Yeah, I haven't seen him live, but as I said in the unpopular video, unpopular musical opinions, I love all eras of Van Halen except for Van Halen 3, really.
Yeah, I really was trying to think of who is like the most influential American heavy band, and I think Van Halen certainly has a case. Alice Cooper Band, I think, would be up there as well.
Oh yeah.
But I will never forgive David Lee Roth Van Halen for Jump and Oh Pretty Woman. Those are unforgivable career mistakes in my book.
Oh Pretty Woman, I can understand being in a cover. What's your beef with Jump?
Dude, that is probably my top 5 worst songs of all time. And that synth sounds like a Olympian jumping over the rope and then getting shot in the face afterwards. Like, it's just terrible. It's so annoying and abrasive. And for when we think of Van Halen as like a great guitar band, stripped away with that fucking keyboard riff.
Yeah, I can understand that. I personally don't just as much as but I respect that opinion.
I like a pretty good handful. And weirdly enough, like, I think Hot for Teacher is probably their best song. So how did they make their best song and their worst song on the same record? I guess you got to give them props for that.
Yeah, if that's your opinion on it, yeah, but without a doubt.
All right. So my number one is not Kiss. I will spoil it because as much as I love Kiss as well, I would say they're top 10. The Kiss is a way more influential live act than they are musically, and I'm willing to admit that.
So is the next act that I have to show, so I feel that.
Yeah, I'm so curious. I don't know if you're gonna pick either of my other two.
We'll have to.
Well, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, this is probably the first, the first short-lived, highly influential American act. There's a lot of bands, 60s, 70s, 80s from all over the world where, they only have one record and it changed people's lives, yada, yada. This band had 3, and the first record is them kind of gearing up. The second record is them using those gears and just freaking out. But the third record is, I am going to go out on a limb here and say, the most important American recording of all time. The guitar playing, the manicness of everything, and they did it all in 8 songs. My number one pick is the Stooges.
Okay.
Especially, Detroit, Michigan, kind of a weird place for like a proto-punk record to come from, especially in 1973. Sometimes I think about how old the Stooges albums are. Funhouse just had its 50th anniversary. The Self-Titled had its 50th last year. This is coming up on 50 in a few years. And there is nothing, to my knowledge, someone can tell me otherwise. A lot of people cite this band called the Monks as being like kind of the first punk record even before this, and I think that's like late 60s, but I don't think that is nearly as raw and animalistic and just uncouth as this record. I know a lot of people actually prefer the 97 Iggy Pop remix of this record because it sounds a little bit clearer. But I think, like you were talking about with Van Halen, I think the imperfections of the original Bowie mix is what makes this record so landmark and so legendary. The fact that, the mixing isn't very good and the recording isn't very good and the production isn't very good. But just the powerhouse guitar playing on this record and the fact that, there's 2 essentially ballads on this record, but they're 2 of sort of just the heaviest, most intense ballads you could think of for being on an early rock and roll record. And again, just the fact that they were able to sort of create this movement of, what nobody knew at the time was punk music because it wasn't really a thing, in 3 albums is unparalleled. There's no band that has ever done it in that short amount of time. It's just, this is my favorite album of all time, just by any group. I think it is, there's nothing about this record that like didn't inspire something else down the road, whether it's in the guitar playing or the live performance or, just just the energy. Like, these guys had such an energy about themselves, and everyone thought they sucked live at the time. Like, you read all these reports about how, like, everyone didn't get the Stooges live, when in reality, it would become, the staple for a fast, aggressive rock band. This comes years before the Ramones. This comes years before, Sex Pistols are basically a boy band anyway, but, just like I would be so curious to know, like, what this was really like at the time, like if people cared or if it sort of later spawned this historical status. Because I can't, again, kind of like the Talking Heads, I can't imagine, in 1973 putting this on and experiencing anything but a mind fuck. I know I keep saying it's unparalleled, but it really is. To my knowledge, there's nothing like this for the time it came out, and the Stooges, to me, influenced every guitar band that I like now. This is where it all kind of starts for me. So that's my pick.
It's interesting because that album comes out when things like Black Sabbath is just starting to become more mainstream, with albums like Volume 4, Master of Reality, and Paranoid. Because everybody was scared of their debut.
Yeah, and the fact that, like, I mean, obviously Sabbath is a crucial band, but, like, they sort of perfected being slow and heavy, whereas the Stooges are like, what if we did that, but way more scary and way faster?
Yeah, and it's interesting because that Raw Power album you showed is the only Stooges album I've ever heard so far.
You know what? I've been thinking about the first records a lot because of all these anniversaries and things that have been coming out with them. And the first record I love them all, right? And the first record I love, but it's kind of like I said, it's kind of them just greasing their wheels. So there's some just kind of like rockers on there. There's like a weird psych song that John Cale helped out with. But it's basically just this like garage rock record with just a little bit of oomph to it. And then you get to Funhouse, and it's definitely influential and a big deal, but it is so freaky how like fast they matured their sound from, just in a year's time, probably less than a year's time at that point. And then, they go through all the trials and tribulations to get to Raw Power, and it's like just this monolith.
Yeah, in a recent VCLT, I'm at 8 Vinyl Low, VCLT'd me a copy of Raw Power on CD, and I finally got to hear the album I've been wanting forever. Because, I could stream anything I want. I have Spotify, but, there's something different about holding a CD or vinyl record and putting it on and hearing it like that for the first time.
I have been so, not listening to a lot of digital music lately because I've gotten so used to how my stereo sounds, and I want every album I listen to sound huge, and it just doesn't happen on earbuds.
Nah, not even the high-end ones don't quite get it. So, but yeah, I'll have to check to see which version, if it has that remix that you're talking about, or if it's the original mix. I'm not sure offhand. But it has like the nice price, I think, on it. So I think it's probably the 90s version.
You know what? If it's a single disc, it's probably the original mix. The only time that I could be wrong, but I think the only time that the 97 remix was issued on CD as a standalone, it had a different cover, and it's called Rough Power. And it's got like a crazy like cartoon cover, and that came out on Bomp in the 90s. And then there was like a triple CD set that came out about 10 years ago that has both mixes and a live set and all the accoutrement.
Okay, yeah, it has the original cover that you have. So maybe, and it's a single disc, so maybe it's the original.
That would be my guess. I mean, I can't say I know every single CD pressing of that record back and forth, but
of course, I mean,
I can only assume.
And I know even less because I'm still learning the group. So, all right, my first pick Now I'm very curious if this is it, and if it's not it, I want to know what your other thoughts were of my choices. I'm going Grateful Dead.
Oh, I am so mad at you. What? What? All right, say your piece, and I'll be patient.
Wait, I want to know what your thoughts of the other two bands were first.
Okay, so my other two were the Doors and the Velvet Underground. Whereas like it's the Doors kind of have this like proto-psych thing. I think most people would probably choose that as their number one, and I'm willing to recognize their important place also as a live act, also as a sort of studio act. Using keyboards instead of bass, like it's a big deal. They have these really legendary recordings. And then my other pick would be the Velvet Underground, the reason I would put the reason I put REM above the Velvet Underground is because you always hear the quote about, everyone who bought a Velvet Underground record started a band. Well, one of those bands was REM. And from what I understand, I've heard a lot of people say in, just kind of oral histories and things, that the way they got into the Velvet Underground was through REM, because they covered Femme Fatale and Pale Blue Eyes on a couple of their early singles. So that was a lot of people's first exposure to Velvet Underground in the sort of early days of alternative. But yeah, oh my God, I mean, Velvet Underground and Nico is probably in that, big four American records with, Raw Power and whatever else. I mean, just a huge debut record. They're all that catalog is just like some of the most, again, furious guitar playing. But I don't own either of those bands on vinyl, which is why I didn't choose them. But
yeah, it's
all right.
Well, it's interesting.
Convince me.
I did consider the Doors, but I actually didn't think of the Velvet Underground for some reason. But the Grateful Dead. Now, first, before I go into the whole spiel, cool thing about this pressing is it's a weird upside down pressing. So like it was put on upside down. I don't know if that's just the early pressings had that mistake or if I just have a crazy misprint, but I just thought that was interesting to note about this copy of Working Man's Dead. But all right. So Grateful Dead is one of the most successful touring bands of all time. They had a very cult following and were cultural icons. Cult following for the fairly obvious reasons of everybody literally being the Deadheads and literally following them city to city just to hear them play, because the thing about a Grateful Dead show is no two shows sound alike, even with the same song, because they're a jam band and they do their various little intricate things in the thing. I'm yet to hear two things that sound nearly identical. And the day I do, I'm going to throw my record player out of the window. I don't know. But
you probably should have already done it after you played that fucking Grateful Dead record.
No, the Grateful Dead are the best bands out there. I take it that you're not a Grateful Dead fan.
No, what? It's not good. But please, I want to hear your argument. I'm genuinely curious, and so I will stop making fun of you.
No, you're good. I don't get offended that easily. I mean, for heaven's sake, I posted my unpopular opinions on YouTube about my music. So, and throughout their career, they played to over 25 million people. I don't know if that's that impressive a number. I'm sure other bands have done that too. But at least for the time, before the arena acts like Kiss and all that came out, for a band that had only one radio hit, not mainstream at all, that's kind of impressive. And historically, and I don't think this has been broken yet, but they have played the biggest concert of the most attendees of 600,000 people in the summer of 1973. I believe that was at Watkins Glen, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was like some sort of summer fest or something like that they were having. And something else that really is impressive that blew my mind the first time I ever heard this. In the 1990s, Jerry Garcia dies in 95. So the Grateful Dead, as they were, before Dead and Company and all Dave's picks and Dick's picks and all that stuff started becoming a thing, their live shows were only half of the decade. However, of American bands, they were the highest grossing bands of the 1990s, with only half the decade to it, which is kind of impressive. The only group that beats them at an international level during that decade would be the Rolling Stones, and understandably so. And what's cool about the Grateful Dead is they played not only their own songs, but they're claimed to be one of the greatest cover bands out there. I'm not sure how much I agree or disagree with that, but they do a damn good cover of tunes, and I'll show an example. Actually, here is an example. They always cover Mama Tried by Merle Haggard. They also do a cover of, they're always doing El Paso, which was a Marty Robbins cover as well. But I digress with that. And their jams are just iconic. I don't know how much of a jam band guy you are. Overall, I'm not a big jam band guy. I do appreciate bands like Fish and Mo and all that stuff. But really, when it comes to jam bands, Grateful Dead is the only one I really go to regularly. Mo here and there, but Grateful Dead is where it is for me in that regard. And, you know, Grateful Dead, at least at the time, was the only band that sounded as good as they did and had as high quality of equipment to sound as good live as their actual recordings. And I don't really think many people could top that until the late 70s with Billy Joel around the Stranger tour and all that. And then Bruce Springsteen in the late 70s too. Really, those before them, it was really only the Grateful Dead that could match their studio works. And even their studio works don't even hold up the Grateful Dead compared to the live works, because, yeah, the live works, 3 minutes, you're done, sounds good. But then you take a song like Fire in the Mountain, which is my favorite Grateful Dead tune, you throw it on the Cornell 77 era tour, you got a 17-minute version of this tune, just jamming to it. And being someone who is going into the music business, I go to a lot of local shows and all that stuff, and some of them do jam band stuff. But it sounds, not all of the time, but a lot of the time it sounds terrible. And I understand that a lot of them are probably refining their sound, and I can't really judge them too much. And I also truly don't know what they're going for their sound. Haven't really full-on talked to many of them. So, but really, compared to people like the Grateful Dead, the original jam band, sounding the way they did, it was like no other. No one has been able to do it since. Even what people call the modern day Grateful Dead, Fish, even though I don't completely agree with that statement, but I digress on that, they don't even compare. And what's great about the Grateful Dead is they were a pioneer of psych rock, but they were a jack of many trades, because they helped pioneer psych rock with Anthem of the Sun. This is the 50th anniversary that came out within the past year or two, which has both the original 1960, I believe 69 mix and 71 mix, which is kind of cool to hear both mixes. I don't hear an extreme difference, but enough of a difference. I'm like, okay, I like both versions. And then it has a live version of stuff that they did during that tour. But with that album, they pioneered psych rock. And psych rock was a thing before that with like 13 Floor Elevators. I'd go as far to call Jefferson Airplane psych rock to an extent and all that. Fear Itself was around. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But the Grateful Dead originally was a blues band with albums like this. And their second album, Monomoxa, kind of combines their blues and their psych rock to an extent. What's Become of the Baby from the album Monomoxa, which I didn't pull out that album, but that's just one of the wackiest psych tunes out there. I don't even get it. I'm not even convinced the Deadheads get it. It's just so out there. And then you get Anthem of the Sun, which the first time I heard it, I was like, this is awful. It was before I understood psych rock too. But I was just like, it's just crazy to hear their debut on Monomoxa and then Anthem of the Sun. So they go blues initially, then they go psych rock. But then what's really cool is they go country with American Beauty and Working Man's Dead, which is, I know you're not the biggest country guy, but
wrong. I have many things to say, but I want to let you finish.
Okay. So they go country-wise, too. And then, as I said, they do a bunch of country covers like Merle Haggard and Marty Robbins and all that. And then they go back to their blues roots but they go jazzy blues with it, with Blues for Allah, which is very interesting. How just within a couple albums they're jumping genres like they're no tomorrow. Like, what other band has jumped genres quite this much and has had such an impact? Then they go funk with Shakedown Street, which is kind of crazy. I know that funk is not one that you really think of when it comes to the Dead, and my opinion saying that as a funk album might be slightly off-putting to some, but it is what it is. And then the only kind of rock album that they did, I guess Go to Heaven you could call a rock album too, but In the Dark is where they start going really rock. And this is their most mainstream album because it has their only top 40 tune and their only number one hit single, Touch of Grey. But yeah, with them changing genres so much, being a jam band and not really having any radio success and being able to have the following that they had really makes it so it's like, it's kind of impressive what they were able to do without all that mainstream stuff. And the Grateful Dead did everything in-house. They didn't have, I mean, they had a little bit of it, but these promoters and the agents and all this stuff that music industry personnel have, especially bands and all that, they mainly did everything on their own. And they had their own people doing it, family members and all that. And then they eventually had fans who were able to apply for jobs. They offered jobs to their fan base, which is kind of cool. And they helped control their ticketing and all that stuff. And some of that ticketing comes with the Grateful Dead didn't want to deal with the scalping and all that. And as I'm sure you're aware of how Pearl Jam feels about the scalping and all that, and the whole stuff with the 90s and all that. But yeah, with all that said, it kind of, for me, I mean, I like the band, but even for those who don't necessarily like the band, I feel like can appreciate what they did pretty much all on their own with not a whole heck of a lot of mainstream success. And as I said, not many bands can claim that they have had as much success as the Grateful Dead has done, jumping from album to album. Because even as a Kiss fan, as yourself and I, Kiss, rockin' band. You got the debut, Hotter Than Hell, License to Kill,
Dress to Kill.
Dress to Kill. Excuse me, I'm pulling out Beastie Boys references here now. But all that stuff. And then they pull out Dynasty. Everybody hates that they went all Dynasty and they went all disco. Many people hate the word disco anyway, but I personally don't mind most disco, but to each their own. Kiss got a lot of shit for that, for going claimed disco. The Grateful Dead never got any of that crap for changing all their genres. The fans just embraced it and loved it. And I'm sure some diehard Kiss fans did too, but
Dynasty's in my top 3. I think that's one of the best Kiss records, bar none.
One of my favorites too. So I'm with you. And as I said, some Kiss fans probably cherish it just as much as you and I, but overwhelmingly, not so much.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious of your thoughts.
So I'll say I don't show a lot of country, but it's because I don't really own a ton. And I on a very base level, of course, I appreciate and enjoy, guys like Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard. I don't own a lot of it because it's not like the sections of the record store I seek out immediately. But I have been getting way more into particularly the country rock of the 70s and 80s. So I just showed a Pure Prairie League record that I'm in love with. I specifically used to own Harvest and After the Gold Rush. I haven't for years, but I wanted to get back into buying Neil Young records, and I decided I'm only going to buy Crazy Horse records because that's what I'm mostly into from Young. Although I did just listen to Homegrown today, which I enjoyed quite a bit. I have a potentially hot take. Granted, I have not heard Anthem of the Sun. I have heard a handful of Grateful Dead albums. I don't think there is anything psychedelic about the Grateful Dead.
Okay.
I don't hear it. And I think, and again, this is coming from a sort of somewhat of a bitter straight edge place, but I think the reason a lot of people cite the Grateful Dead as a psychedelic band is because they were all high when those records came out, you know?
Yeah, and I wouldn't consider them completely psychedelic at all. They're not. Just really Anthem of the Sun, if I'm being completely honest, is the only full
Sure.
on. And with that album, they helped pioneer psych rock. But really, rather than that, from the album Monomox, What's Become of the Baby is the only other psych rock thing. They have short little elements here and there, but they're really a rock band, a jam band kind of thing. They are not a psych band overall.
Yeah, and it's funny how many like psych bands of the late 70s they influenced. And so I think that's part of the reason why I think a lot of people in general put them in that camp. As far as jam bands go, I appreciate a band that can jam, but I'm not really into bands that have like made it their whole career. It's I don't really know what it is. I think so. Like Black Crowes are actually one of my top 20 bands. I did a whole video on them, and they're huge Grateful Dead fans, and you can hear that all over their music. They toured with the Grateful Dead. I think on the last tour, one of the very last tours that Jerry Garcia was involved with, they were opening up for the Dead, or it might have been the first one after he passed away, sometime in the mid-90s. And that was actually what started to give the Black Crowes the reputation of a jam band, the fact that they were changing their sets every night, and they started recording all the shows, and that whole thing came from them. You know who has a really weird jam band following is Tool.
Yeah.
Jam band dudes love Tool. Going to see Tool is the weirdest mix of people, because you get your metalheads and then the jam band guys, and then like the full-rimmed glasses math rock dudes. Like it's this such an odd gathering of people.
Yeah, I've never seen them live, but I think it would be quite a fun experience.
Yeah, and of course they're great, and they have a huge visual element to their show. I guess that's kind of one of the things that does kind of irk me about the Dead is like if you want to go on a instrumental journey, like that's fine, but I feel like there's not a strong, at least not that I've seen, like a strong visual element. I actually watched the Grateful Dead movie recently, and I was kind of bummed at how like it was just kind of them playing, like even in the most like out there moments of the musicality, there's not like, and I guess maybe the point is you would see them and take drugs and see your own stage show, but that's like not really what I'm about.
Honestly, that probably is. I haven't seen the Grateful Dead movie. They didn't have all the visual effects that you have, like with screens and all that we have nowadays. And I know that that's not necessarily what you mean, but I definitely in today's day that would be a whole lot easier. Honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with the drugs in regards to seeing things. Because just being on stage, for me, just listening to it, if I was ever to see like Dead and Company nowadays, which I would love to do, for me, just hearing the music, it's just relaxing and chill for me. It's almost like an eargasm.
Mm-hmm.
And visual effects definitely are cool, but also I do also enjoy just the intimate. I've seen concerts where it's just the performer and the guitar the whole time, and I also really enjoy that. And then I've seen the stuff with the visuals. Dream Theater, I'll tell you, when I saw Dream Theater, the Metropolis from Memory 20th Anniversary and the Distance Over Time tour, I will, as everybody knows in the VC, Metropolis Part 2 Scenes from Memory is my favorite album of all time. Well, after seeing it live with the visuals,
it's incredible.
Yeah, especially the song, I'm trying to blank his name of this song. But anyway, pretty much the scene where they're in the graveyard, where Nicholas is going to the graveyard, and you see all the headstones and everything. On top of the fact that they're paying homage to some of their favorite musical acts who have passed away in the process of it, because they have Frank Zappa right after Chris Cornell died, or not too long after. Like they have that on there. And I can't believe I'm drawing a blank as to the name of the tune at the moment, but that the visuals do definitely make a difference. And
it's funny, the first time I saw Dream Theater was the tour right before that, where they did all of Images and Words, and they had no visuals for that tour. It was just them playing. And I was very confused because that was the first time I had seen them And I was like, well, I've seen a bunch of live footage from them, and they normally have like kind of a visual element. And listen, I didn't go to music school. I can only take so much of really proficient guys playing their shit for so long. It's impressive until it's not, you know. And so
I could see that. For me, I'm just like,
yeah. So I was very pleased on the Metropolis tour where they actually had a visual element to the show.
I'm surprised by that because I know that I've seen clips of like previous tours for like the 2013 debut or self-titled album tour with the visuals. So hearing that they didn't for the 20th anniversary of that kind of is really shocking.
It was very weird, and I don't know if they were going for just like they play the same theater every time they play Chicago, and it's kind of this very nice sit-down theater. It's where a lot of stand-up people perform, actually, but that's just because they are sort of a theatrical band, and that's where they like to play. So I don't know if they were just kind of going for a, hey, like, we're a real band, just watch us play, which, again, like, is only good for so long. And I love Dream Theater a lot.
Right.
I will, anyway, to not go on too many tangents here, I will, on your recommendation, listen to Anthem of the Sun, because that is one of the Grateful Dead records I have not heard, and I'm curious to check out the psychedelic qualities of it, because I do appreciate that. And we can agree to disagree. Let's put it that way.
That's fair. Do we throw on as I said, and I keep referencing my unpopular opinion music video, but like in all honesty, everybody loves what they love. They know what they know. It is what it is. Music is subjective, and that's what's beautiful about music. Everybody has their different tastes and all that stuff. But I really like how you're getting into the country rock stuff with things like Pure Prairie League, which is arguably one of the best country rock bands of the 1970s, in my opinion.
It's so good, and I don't know like if people write it off because they're kind of a one-hit wonder, but there's some incredible playing on that, which has like also been a huge sort of point of interest of me this year. And even like when I did my contest back in March or April, somewhere around there, one of the questions of it was show a song that's over 20 minutes, and a ton of people showed Champagne Jam by the Allman Brothers, which I never heard. Yeah, and that's a ripper. Like, that's awesome. I have yet to find a vinyl copy that's clean, but that is like now one of my most wanted records right now.
Yeah, Pure Prairie League, it's interesting because most people only consider them a one-hit wonder for their tune Amy, and that's actually the tune that got them back and being re-signed with RCA, because RCA, they did 2 or 3 albums, RCA dropped them. Then some disc jockey got a hold of Amy, started playing it, and then RCA, the bunch of albums were signed. RCA, so like, all right, guys, come back, kind of thing. But
and the album version has this killer intro that makes it like a 6 or 7 minute song altogether, and it's really sick.
Yeah, they I can't remember. They open it up with "In and Out of Love," and then in the outro of the song "Amy" itself, they have an outro of the same lyrical thing, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that, quite frankly, the entire Bustin' Out album that you got your hands on is kind of pretty much their it's one of their 2 most popular albums. The other one is 2-Lane Highway. And a lot of the hits that they have are from Bustin' Out, such as Jazzman Number 9, Angel. Those were 2 other hits that were off that. If I had a track list in front of me, I'd be able to tell you more, but I can't at the moment. 2-Lane Highway, title track, was a major hit for them. I can't remember which album it was off hand. I want to say it was their album Dance, but they have a cover of Buddy Holly's That'll Be the Day, which is a great cover. That was a hit for them. It's very interesting. A lot of people think that they're a one-hit wonder, and generally overall, I guess because most people who are not too familiar with them, they only know Amy. But if you dive deeper, you realize there's a lot more hits in there.
So some of the best bands of the 70s and 80s are like one-hit wonders that nobody explored better,
Oh, yeah. And I would just definitely say Pure Prairie League is one of those.
Absolutely. Well, we somehow got from Talking Heads to Pure Prairie League in a very elongated amount of time.
Yeah, but it's all good stuff, man. And everybody loves these collab videos, even if it gets off topic slightly. So I know that they always love that stuff. And Yeah, definitely check out more Pure Prayer League. I mean, I got most of their works because I inherited them from my grandfather, but
Mm-hmm.
so I am, I guess, slightly biased from that. But like, they're
Yeah, it's one of those bands I see them all the time. It's just about finding, one that's clean at the right time. But yeah, so I have Busting Out, and just right. They only really have like 4, maybe 5 of kind of their initial run. So that's
Once the album Firing Up came out, they kind of even an album or two before that, it was kind of So it was really their first 4 to 5, as you said, that were the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Other than greatest hits albums, the greatest hits albums with the hits from the other albums, they're not terrible. And I haven't heard the newest album that came out within the past 20 years. I haven't heard that, but one day I will. But it's not high priority because I can only imagine. But we have now digressed a lot, as you even pointed out 2 moments ago. So those are some of our top 3, in our opinions, influential bands from the American people. What are your guys' thoughts? Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Do you have bands that we didn't mention, such as The Doors to the Velvet Underground that we already mentioned that neither of us mentioned? Let us know. If you don't know who Logan is, well, I didn't get to know him until he entered my contest for the 300 subs, and that's how I got introduced, and I've been happy with his content ever since. And he puts out a lot of it, so if you like to just sit back, relax, and be in front of the television all day with YouTube, guy. So
you know what? To be honest, it took me so long to get to your channel because I never watched my Guitar Player 1 through 6. So I was trying to wait to complete the series until I got to you.
That's great. I never heard anybody say that before. That was But anyway, if you don't know who Logan is, his links, as I said earlier, will be below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for Logan for joining me.
Now, thanks for having me. I'll have to. I got to get you on the next. I really want to do another Kiss Army hangout, and I'll be sure to get you on the next one when it all rounds out.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out. You'll have to send me details when the time comes. But thank you guys for watching. Keep on spinning that wax, and we'll see you in the next vinyl record video.